I'm Rona Cohen. I manage our Energy and Environment program at CSG East, and we have a really exciting and distinguished group of presenters joining us today. I'm super excited for this session. But before I turn it over to our moderator, I would just like to let everyone know that we are recording the session and it will be available on our website in the next few days. And I'd also like to give a quick shout out to my colleagues at CSG who are working the Zoom controls to make sure that things run smoothly today. And that's Eve Workington and Dylan McDowell. Okay, and so to kick us off, I'm really pleased to introduce our moderator, Vermont State Representative Carolyn Partridge. Representative Partridge is a 20-year member of the Vermont House, where she chairs the Committee on Agriculture and Forestry. And of course, she also serves as co-chair of the CSG East Agriculture and Rural Affairs Policy Committee. Representative Partridge has been a leader in Vermont in promoting policies around climate-smart agricultural practices. And at Representative Partridge's urging a couple of years ago, CSG East began to delve into those issues as well. Representative Partridge, I thank you for moving the conversation forward at CSG, and I turn it over to you.
Oh, thank you so much, Rona. I really appreciate that introduction, and I want to thank you, as well as all of the CSG staff that have made this panel possible. And I'm fascinated. We've been pushing this in Vermont for several years, both on the agriculture level and forest carbon. And we assigned a task force several years ago. There was a little pause, but I just talked to Ryan Patch this morning, and they have resumed their work. They've met 5 times, and I'm really excited that that work continues. I want to thank everybody for coming, and I really want to thank our 2 presenters. I'm going to introduce them. Jeffrey Potent is Adjunct Professor of International and Public Affairs at Columbia University, where he teaches corporate sustainable development, sustainable agriculture, and related subjects at the Columbia University School of International and Public Affairs and the Earth Institute. Jeff formerly led corporate partnerships for the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, Office of Water in Washington, D.C. Earlier in his career, he served as EPA U.S. Department of Agriculture Liaison and Regional Director of the USDA National Integrated Water Quality Program, facilitating collaboration among land-grant universities, EPA, USDA, industry associations, and other agencies and universities. And we thank you, Jeff, for joining us today. Our other guest is Dr. Cynthia Rosenzweig, is a Senior Research Scientist at the NASA Goddard Institute for Space Studies and the co-located Columbia University Earth Institute Center for Climate Systems Research. Dr. Rosenzweig's specific area of expertise is climate change and food systems. At NASA GISS, she heads the Climate Impacts Group, whose mission is to investigate the interactions of climate on systems and sectors important to human well-being. Dr. Rosenzweig is the co-founder and a member of the Executive Committee of the Agricultural Model Intercomparison and Improvement Project, which is known as AgMIP, a globally integrated and transdisciplinary study of climate change and the food system at regional, national, and global scales, including the participation of over 1,000 leading researchers from developed and developing nations. In 2019, Dr. Rosenzweig was coordinating lead author of the Food Security Chapter for the IPCC Special Report on Climate Change and Land. And I want to welcome you both and thank you so much for your time today. And I'll turn it over to you to do your presentation. I understand you're tag teaming, and that is fantastic.
Thank you, Carolyn. Rona, if you can bring up the presentation.
Yep. Can you all see this?
Yeah, here we are. If you can make it full screen, that would be much better.
Okay, I do have it on full screen. Is it not showing up for you all?
Yeah, I've been able to make it a little bit larger, so I guess we're good to go. Okay, thank you so much for having us. We're delighted to have this opportunity to speak with state legislators about innovative initiatives, and most importantly, as well as presenting what we're up to facilitate a dialogue on what's happening at the state level, what what initiatives you folks are working on and the kind of feedback that you're getting from your stakeholders on innovative approaches to have agriculture play a role in addressing climate change and other environmental challenges. So what we're going to be speaking today is primarily about a project that is still very much in the conceptual stage, which is developing a payment for ecosystem services project for the region that constitutes the New York City Watershed, which is a 2,000 square mile region that supplies water for 11 million New Yorkers. And an important partner in this new initiative is AgMIP, which you've been introduced to already. And Cynthia is the lead on this project for the US, and she'll speak in great detail about AgMIP, and we'll talk a bit about how AgMIP is going to be supporting our project to address some of the major challenges that we've been seeing in developing carbon payment for ecosystem services, as well as ecosystem services in water quality and other areas. Next slide. And my screen is a little off. There we go. So as I said, this is a concept under development, and it was initiated by an organization called the Center for Agricultural Development and Entrepreneurship, or CADE, in Oneonta, New York. And CADE is a local agriculture assistance organization. They work very closely with state and federal programs and provide expertise to help local farmers to actually succeed in this very challenging marketplace. And we have an initiative that I'm part of with colleagues from other universities, notably Cornell University, to develop a what we call Vision 2050, an agricultural plan concept for the state of New York. We're not actually calling it a full plan because that takes a lot more resources than we have available, but we're teasing the idea that New York State can actually develop a comprehensive strategic plan for agriculture to advance agriculture that is regenerative, profitable, and equitable. So in our discussions, we realized we needed to explore something that would advance payment for ecosystem services, and this project bubbled out of that. And in fact, one of the board members of CADE is a co-lead with me on the project, Ken Jaffe, and Ken's on the call today. And Ken will definitely add his 2 cents as we go along. And we also have some of our AgMIP collaborators on the call with us as well today. But the objective here is to develop a project that attempts to overcome some of the hurdles that have been encountered in trying to develop carbon and other payment for ecosystem services programs for agriculture and forestry, because there have been many challenges. And probably the main challenge right now is getting the science right. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. But one of the other major challenges is creating programs that actually allow for small and mid-sized farmers to participate in a cost-effective manner. And this is a critical issue because we're beginning to see initiatives bubbling up around the country, particularly for carbon sequestration, and they are in concept going to be suitable for much larger farms. And I've been advocating strongly, as well as our colleagues. I'm on my Congressman's Ag Advisory Committee, and we've been advocating strongly that whatever programs come out of the federal government and also hopefully at the state level are programs that allow smaller farmers to be able to participate, to generate credits or payment or I don't want to use the word credits because that implies a particular approach, but let's say generate or implement practices rather that generate carbon reductions that can be compensated for in one way or another. And AgMIP is critical for us because AgMIP, through its multi-modeling methodologies, which Cynthia will talk about in great detail, will help us to actually develop rigorous and verifiable baselines and the effects of the implementation of various practices, so we can be sure that we're getting the results that we intend. So our project is being conceptualized for this region. I'll talk about that more in a moment, but hopefully this is something we can roll out throughout New York State, and maybe even lessons learned that can be brought nationally. Next slide. So we're working in this region partially because the folks who are part of the team live and work in this region, but also the Hudson Valley Catskills region, which is the New York City watershed, specifically in New York State generally, are regions that are facing many of the same challenges that agriculture is facing nationally and globally. So it's a wonderful testing ground for that reason. But also, and this is the real exciting part, we're a hotbed of innovation. Not only do we have an entity called the New York City Watershed Agricultural Council, which is an entity created as part of the New York City Watershed program. And it's a partnership with local farmers to bring additional technical and financial assistance to farmers, as well as, in augmenting rather federal and state programs. But we also have a number of incubators. We have Stone Barns, we have Glenwood, we have Hudson Carbon. These are really innovative nonprofit entities that are bringing a lot of capacity, incubators, educational programs. And we have farmers that are, as they say, used to farming under glass, meaning that they're used to dealing with a lot of these programs and responding and providing services beyond the commodities they produce. So we feel this is an excellent place to test out innovative approaches. And we're also hoping that whatever comes out of these programs, whatever models we develop and effectiveness that we're able to achieve, can support specifically in New York State the implementation of the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, or CLCPA. CLCPA, we like to boast, correct us if we're wrong, but it's one of the most advanced climate action programs in the country. Other states, please tell me I'm wrong, but we're really proud of it. It was signed into law in 2019, and we're now going through a rigorous process, stakeholder process, to develop the dimensions of this for many industry sectors. And we're hoping that our project can support this initiative by testing out an innovative model for the agriculture sector. And also, of course, success in these projects means success for local agriculture, and successful local agriculture advances food security, nutrition, entrepreneurship, livelihoods, rural community resilience. There are many, many benefits. I'm kind of preaching to the choir here on the benefits of local regenerative agriculture, but we're hoping this project, creating payment systems that compensate farmers, augmenting federal and state programs, not only for capital. Can you folks mute? I'm hearing some voices, by the way. Not only provides capital assistance for farmers, but actually helps to compensate operation and maintenance costs, and even provides a profit margin. So a farmer can make a business decision to sequester carbon, to develop other ecosystem services, build a business case for regenerative farming. Next slide. Now, we have been at this for a long time. This is not a new issue of getting the science right for payment for ecosystem services. And this is an article that was published in Science magazine back in 2015. And it's the result of a collaborative process at Columbia that was funded by USDA, where we brought together all the folks you see listed here, all of us collaborators, to explore what kind of framework and what kind of principles are needed to get the science right for payment for ecosystem services. And this is one of the most cited papers in this field. ResearchGate, which is one of the scientific research portals, has identified this little paper. It's only a couple of pages with a framework slide as being one of the most cited papers in this field nationally. So we really feel that not only we're proud at Columbia to be involved in this important work, but that it's clear that there is a lot of interest in getting the science right so that we can build verifiable programs. And that's why, at least for this particular project we're developing in New York City Watershed, that we have AgMIP as a partner, because AgMIP and its methodology will go a long way to helping to solve some of these challenges. And with that, next slide, please. I want to turn it over to Cynthia, who is, Cynthia, pardon me, I apologize for saying this, but is truly a rock star in this field. I've known about Cynthia's work for 20 years, and just this last year, I was invited by her to be an AgMIP collaborator, and it has been a delight to work with her, and I have tremendous respect for her. So we're very fortunate to have her with us today. So with that, Cynthia, please take over.
Thank you, Jeff, and right back at you. It's great to work with you. And Carolyn, thank you so much. Rona and everyone on the call. It's wonderful to be in touch with state government folks, because that's so much where the action in ag actually takes place. So I'm going to put on your hats. We're going to be agricultural modelers for a while for the next few slides. So all over the world, there are folks who create models of different parts of the food system, so that we can really assess and create the evidence base for policies. But it's not just all, AgNIP doesn't work just all over the world. Of course, we work in our own home country. It's led out of Columbia University in New York, and Carolyn Mutter, who's on, I believe, is the AgNIP coordinator at Columbia University. So there are more than 200 modelers across all the states, folks. So we have they're a resource base for you all. And what we do is we bring together researchers who are both from the climate side, from the biophysical, all the biology of crops, and we're talking primarily crops here, but it's crops and livestock, and the economists as well, because it's really by bringing these groups together, these disciplines together, that we can then really understand what are the studying the practices, the technologies, and the incentives under both current and future climate conditions. Next slide, please. So what a primary motivation for AgNIP was to bring more than one model together. So there's been lots and lots of studies and lots of great individual models and model studies. But when you bring the models together, you can actually compare results when you use protocols to all do the same thing. And what this does is it creates what we call a solution space of everyone doing the same thing, so we can really then get a much better handle on the evidence for policies. That's really the crux of what we do. The other crux of it is that we are not just modelers sitting in front of our computers doing all this modeling. It is all what we call stakeholder driven. So we interact. You can see here in our circularity here, we go to people who are making these decisions now. Many of them right here on, some of them right here on this call, you. And we ask you, and we ask the stakeholders, what decisions are you making? What kind of evidence do you need? And then we create the protocols that we're going to use in the study, so that we hope that by this, and what we have found by doing this all over the world and in the United States, that then the results from these are a strong solutions base and evidence base for policies. Next, please. So I'm going to give just three very brief examples from around the country. Jeff was talking about what we're doing here to get that payment for ecosystem services going here in the Northeast, but this has been done. I'm going to give you some examples from around the country. So the first one is in the Pacific Northwest. RIA stands for Regional Integrated Assessment, and this is work that was done by a whole team of researchers funded by USDA. John Antle, who's one of the leaders of AgNIP, was the chief economist on this study. And so what it was about was really assessing the ability of using policy incentives in dryland wheat systems in the Pacific Northwest to test how climate smart practices, such as changes in soil management, incorporation of new biofuel crops, could actually affect the farmers in terms of their incomes and greenhouse gas reductions. And that's why we always include the economists, because that well-being that Jeffrey was talking about, look, if it's not good for the farmers in terms of their pocketbooks, this is, no policy is probably going to work, right? So this coordination of climate policy design, development of technology, and then with this stakeholder-based and farmer-centric approach was what went on in this project, and it showed that the farmers could have higher farm incomes with those strategies, as well as help on greenhouse gas emissions reduction. So that's an example from the Pacific Northwest. The next example on the next slide is from Bruno Basso, one of the U.S. AgNIP consortium leaders. And here, this is in the U.S. Midwestern states, showing that these are, we link to the red dots are experimental sites. And those are and we use all the techniques with remote sensing, crop modeling, to set up a modeling system that can really be used to test, in this case, soil organic carbon. But just to say, these are, you can see here are the models lined up. I won't go through all the names, but it is this study used 5 different crop models. And the results are on the next slide, which are showing, okay, so I know this may be a little bit, there could be, maybe Jeff and I will give a quiz on this slide at the end. Just kidding. But what this slide shows is that when you use the multi-model approach, we call that an ensemble, it outperforms any of the single models. And so you see that there are four models on the left, and then the ensemble. And if you look at the root mean square error, that's like how well are the models doing? The ensemble has the lowest error. So this is why bringing the models and modelers together with the stakeholders to answer crucial questions about the policies provides the evidence base. So this can then provide the baselines and the potential for soil carbon change in this case in the US, in our Midwest. I think, let's see. I think we now turn back to Jeff for the wrap up, but just wanted to give you a flavor of some of the regional integrated assessments and the type of things that we do to provide evidence base for policies. So Jeff, back to you. With the next slide. I believe we're tag teaming back to you.
Great, thank you, Cynthia. So clearly, as Cynthia just pointed out, applying multi-model assessment approaches is very powerful. And we need to do this to establish baselines. Primarily, we're talking about carbon sequestration, but for the whole suite of ecosystem services. And most importantly, what kind of effect we see from particular practice implementation. And those practices, the effectiveness of those practices vary dramatically based on cropping systems, based upon climate conditions. And we need the powerful tools that this multimodal assessment framework offers so that we can actually incentivize farmers to do the right thing and then measure the success of those efforts. I want to read one quote from our 2015 study that I cited earlier. We noted that too often science and practice are poorly linked in environmental interventions, and we need inclusive processes to develop, test, and refine basic science principles. And that's what we're doing here with the AgMIP program and applying it specifically in our Ag Payment for Ecosystem Services program. And I cited a study from 6 years ago, but just a couple of weeks ago, Environmental Defense Fund and Woodwell Center up at Woods Hole Institute just issued a report identifying the tremendous amount of concerns they have about getting the science right. But they also went on to note that there are many approaches and tools that are now at our disposal that weren't there previously to do it, notably to do it, meaning getting the science right. Notably, they spoke about hybrid approaches, integrating field measurement with remote sensing and modeling to get the results that we need. So we're at a precipice of innovation in moving forward on this. And the message, the takeaway message for legislators is that you can have some confidence that the science can support your legislative initiatives. So with that, I think we'll wrap up and turn it back to Carolyn to facilitate a discussion. And by the way, if you have any comments, please reach out to me. And if it's a question for Cynthia, I can pass it on to her as well.
Well, thank you both so much. I noticed in the chat that Dee Barrett was saying that, of course, the Hudson Valley Carbon Farming Pilot Project funded in the New York State budget is currently underway in the same region. And I wonder if Dee had a question or wanted to mention a word or two about that. So Dee, I think you're still here.
Yeah, thank you, Carolyn. I'd love to I noticed that Mr. Potent didn't mention it at all as one of the innovative things happening. It happens to be the first study of its kind in the country. So I just wondered if he had any thoughts about it.
Yes, actually, I did mention it early on. I referred to it as Hudson Carbon. I don't know if you characterize it as being the Hudson Carbon initiative, but I did mention them. We have reached out to Hudson Carbon to coordinate their work with our effort in the New York City Watershed. So is that what you're referring to? The work?
Well, we funded the New York. I am a legislator. I'm one of those people that you're speaking to, and we funded a pilot project in the Hudson Valley, which is part of your New York City watershed, in which the soil and water districts are monitoring over a 2-year period a number of different farms and working on identifying the sequestration models and the impact. And your tools obviously would be useful, but Hudson Carbon is a different organization. That is the Ben Dobson's organization. There's several alliances that have been formed, but the Hudson Valley Carbon Project is a New York State funded in the state budget pilot project of measuring carbon sequestration in I think it's 20 different farms in the Hudson Valley.
We will definitely work with them. There's tremendous resource there, so we will not miss out on that.
Yeah, thank you, Dee Dee and Jeff for discussing that. I think it's really important. I'm going to ask folks who want to ask questions to please put your little yellow or green, blue hand up, whatever it shows up to you, so that I can track the order. We're going to ask folks, because we want to get as much participation as possible, we're going to ask you to potentially limit your questions to about 30 seconds so that we can get answers and get, and then if we need to move around, we can come back to you. So Mark Pacheco, your hand is up. Go right ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. Great presentation and, fantastic work with the IPCC, Cynthia. And the report that came out is quite troubling and make sure that all of us really need to, get to work and do everything we can with subnational governments across the country. And there's so much we need to do. In this space, yesterday, we had a presentation from a gentleman by the name of Tony Seba. Tony put forth a series of predictions, some of which are already happening relative to the transformation of what he believes will take place in the agricultural community over the next several years, and some of that is already happening in terms of cellular technology, in terms of replicating chicken, in terms of chicken nuggets and the like. The same thing with dairy products. In the implication that's there in terms of farming is huge, according to him. Have you both taken a look at these types of initiatives that are going on with big ag and big pharma that really changes the landscape of what we may all be faced with as we go forward?
Maybe I'll jump in first, Jeff, and then over to you. In the IPCC special report on climate change and land, in our chapter on food security, we did look at those technologies in particular. And while there is progress being made on those, I would say the consensus among the scientists was that they would probably play a role, but that there still needed to be really a tremendous amount of development in the technologies. And then once you have the technologies, then you have the adoption of the technologies. And there are, of course, barriers in particular to some of those. So, but we definitely feel there's a role to play for those kinds of technologies. But I guess we were a bit more, I would say, it's just a bit more cautious about their early transformation, for example, of meat production in particular.
Well, Doctor,
Jeff,
one of the things I would suggest, and we're going to have, I know Rona can send it over to you, but we have the recording of Tony's presentation, and we'd like to, share that with both of you to get a reaction, because he points out other things that he had predicted where a whole lot of people said wouldn't happen, and they are actually happening right now.
Absolutely. Happy to look
And
at
so
it.
it'd be good to, really, and then the only other question I had, Carolyn, was on the certainty of the modeling. Do you see the multi-model concept that you're working on now coming out sometime in the future with a gold standard, so that the international community will actually have a model that would be certifiable as verification in terms of carbon sequestration?
Yes, I do want to speak to this, and then this links to the next question. I think about, there was another question about COMET, and Jeff, I definitely want you to come in on this. The way that we approach the development and the development of the modeling technologies and the innovation there is not to, the goal is not to make one model that that is going to be the one. Instead, the way that the IPCC predicts the climate is that it takes 30 or 35 global climate models and then looks at them together, because that way you are able to rigorously see what those uncertainties are. So it's not, so our goal isn't to have one that for sure this is the answer. It's much more to say, here's all, it's because the models together do a better job than just one model. That's what the climate modelers have found, and that's what the ag modelers have found over and over again. But Jeff, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Cynthia. Just as a quick answer on COMET, we are very much aware of the importance of COMET. It's an evolving tool that USDA is utilizing. We actually had a student team that went out to one of our local farms in the Catskills to test the utilization of COMET for small Northeast farms. And they did find it to be indeed an effective tool, but their takeaway was that that COMET needs to be able to work well for small farms and the unique type of cropping systems we see on our small farms in this region. So we definitely will be looking closely at COMET as a useful tool as we're developing our local project. But also you had asked about big ag and big pharma. I don't work with big pharma, but I have worked quite a bit with big ag. And it's really exciting to see how major agriculture producers, and actually more importantly, ag integrators, the vertically integrated companies like Smithfield and Purdue, how much they're working with their producers and their own company-owned farms to improve their cropping systems. And I was involved with those two corporations and several others on reducing chemical inputs in their fields, reducing soil compaction, improving soil quality generally. And what has come out of those types of initiatives were changes in procurement procedures, so that when these big integrators work with individual farmers, contract farmers, they are specifying ag practices which will yield a larger array of ecosystem services, as well as improving yield. Now you mentioned innovation. I didn't hear his presentation, but I very much would like to hear Tony's presentation. But there's a lot of buzz around innovation. So, for example, controlled environment agriculture, how exciting that is. And it may well be exciting, but a little less attention is being given to the innovation that's happening in the field. Tremendous breakthroughs in understanding soil microbiology, and that healthy microbiome in the soil results in healthy plants, which result in healthy people. And this research is exceptionally exciting, and it is related to conventional, or shall we say more traditional ag practices. So it doesn't quite get the buzz in the media, but the innovation, the scientific discoveries and the associated innovation in change of practices is definitely there. And that's producing not only improved yield, but also improved ecosystem services.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Jeffrey and Cynthia. Peter Bevan Baker from PEI has a question or a comment. And Peter, I'm just going to let you read from the chat.
Well, thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be with you. I just happened to join the call when somebody was gushing about how lovely Prince Edward Island is, and I concur.
C'est moi.
Oh, it's you. Well, thank
Yes.
you. I have the great privilege of living here. I'll paraphrase what I've written here. I live in Canada, obviously Eastern Canada, and similar to the States, the provinces here have a lot of jurisdiction over the agricultural sector. Unlike the States, and maybe I'm wrong on this, but here in Canada, we live in a carbon pricing mechanism. That's the economic environment that exists here for carbon mitigation, with a rising price of carbon over time. And unlike a cap and trade situation where I can see quite clearly how the cost and the payment to farmers could happen, I'm wondering what mechanisms exist, if any, in a regimen where it's a carbon pricing economic environment, and how those payments make their way from that system into farmers' pockets.
I don't think I can actually answer that question, because it is so much a work in progress. There is a lot of innovation in terms of on-the-ground projects and policy development, and probably the other legislators on the call could speak better, more effectively to the policy development happening at the state level. We AgMIP have been providing input into the federal level on the importance of incorporating science into the various statutes that are being developed. But I don't think the United States has a plan of action yet as advanced as Canada. The Biden administration certainly is pushing the agenda. We had a visit from Secretary Vilsack, the Secretary of U.S. Department of Agriculture, in the Catskills a couple of weeks ago. And when I asked him a question about payment for ecosystem services, he told us emphatically that in 30 days, USDA will be issuing a preliminary plan on payment for ecosystem services. So we've got our fingers crossed that that's going to come out and provide some guidance for moving forward.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Cynthia, did you want to add to that?
Yes, because I think it also ties into another question that was just coming up on the chat about policy, getting to policy. And what we do for that is AgMIP works with a larger partnership called the Food Climate Partnership that also is with policy experts from Seba, where Jeff is located. And we just published a paper that was about the science policy double helix, that really agreeing with your comment that in the end, it has to be the right policies. I think that links to both of these questions. And we can put in the chat or send to everyone a recent blog post about the specific policies that these that could be the most effective for, in this case, carbon emissions reductions. So just as we're joining the climate scientists, with the folks who really understand how the soil and crops work, for example, and livestock. The economists, we also bring we are also working closely from the beginning with the policies as well.
Thank you, Cynthia. I noticed that my colleague from Vermont, Representative Carrie Dolan's hand is up. Carrie, do you have a question? Hello.
I do. And hello, Carolyn. It's great to see you. And I truly appreciate the topic for today. And it's been a truly inspirational conversation. So I thank the presenters. My question is this. I also see the value of having a real focus on carbon sequestration and the multiple benefits that we can realize with a payment for ecosystem services that can support agriculture well into the 21st century and beyond. My question is in regards to some of the trade-offs, though, and I would appreciate your thoughts or consideration in terms of how we can maximize all ecosystem services specific to perhaps one idea or one topic of biodiversity, for example. There's always trade-offs in everything, as you can imagine. And when you promote a carbon-focused approach, we may lose the opportunity to try to also maximize the biological functions, such as support for our pollinators. If we're relying on, for example, cover cropping, but then having to use a pesticide to remove that cover crop, there is that trade-off. So I welcome your thinking about how we can move forward with an approach that can really truly maximize all the services that we're trying to accomplish.
Thanks, Carrie. Jeff or Cynthia, you want to go ahead?
I'm going to jump in and then Jeff. The regional economic model that we use for the regionally integrated assessments that I was sharing the results from, its actual name it's called the TOA model, trade-off analysis. So we're very aware of that. And actually, of course, in the real world, there are always trade-offs. And so by taking a farming system approach that includes all these different parts of the system, we are able to, at least in, no model's perfect or no modeling system's perfect, but we are able to give some evidence regarding trade-offs as well, as you were saying. And I feel right on in what you're saying, that we have to be thinking and holistically. Jeff, what are your thoughts?
Mine is, my perspective is more from on the ground experience and trying to develop ecosystem service programs over the years. And that is that the point you mentioned about trade-offs is a critical one, because if you present an opportunity for a business person, and farmers are business people, to receive compensation for optimizing a particular service, then that service will be optimized. And if it's detrimental to other services, it's going to be problematic. So we need policy based on the science that Cynthia just pointed out, that doesn't create a skewing effect where one service is optimized to the detriment of others. And that requires holistic thinking, systems thinking, which is something that's hard to come by these days. Mm-hmm. But clearly the policy has to speak to that, because if it doesn't, we will send out perverse incentives. And there are examples of that. Ken Jaffe, who's one of our collaborators on the call, he points out very often some of the problems with the California trading program that had created some perverse incentives. So we've got to make sure that the policy is holistic and not be single issue oriented.
Carolyn, could we ask Terry Nip, who is a policy expert on our team, to say a few words about the policy aspects? Terry.
Absolutely, please.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, and thank you all for really a tremendous discussion. Your questions have been wonderful, and I wish we had nice pithy answers to all of them, but they are the critical, obvious challenges we're all struggling with. I would underscore what Jeff said a moment ago about work in progress. I hope USDA does come out with this report soon, but whatever stage they're at, as that comes out, we know that in fact they're really working hard across all the different federal agencies, across all the different components of USDA to try to fit these things together. And our discussions have been with the research and education components of the Office of the Chief Economist at USDA, but we're working our way towards working with NRCS for exactly these reasons. And the House Agriculture and the Senate Agriculture Committees in the recent discussions about the infrastructure bill and the next round of large-scale funding, we're asking really fundamental questions of what is the role of agriculture in contributing to meeting climate change challenges. How much are we a part of the cause, but more importantly, how much and how can we be part of the solution? And there's a recognition of the complexities, but I think a lot of unraveling and sorting to do. I know that part of the goal is to look across the portfolio of programs that are already supported by the Farm Services Agency and promoted by different programs in NRCS, but they're asking exactly these questions, or at least some people are, which is if we offer increased incentives for ecosystem services, how do we avoid double paying? How do we properly account for not only carbon sequestration, but reductions in greenhouse gas emissions? How do we come to terms with livestock and the dairy industries, recognizing that this is a very politically sensitive and charged issue? I know at the higher levels of this administration, there's a real concern that they are listening to, and that they're seen as listening to the concerns of real farmers and producers. And maybe this is more on my own, but one of my real concerns is that whatever does get set up, that the payments and the benefits and the rewards are getting to real farmers and real practitioners, not to say anything negative about the service providers, but I want to make sure that the real resource is getting to the guys who really need it. So it's a working, we're trying, and we're getting the role, as Cynthia has said, and to try to ensure that the best is undergirding the discussion.
Thanks so much, Terry. And
Carolyn?
It's an interesting. Oh, Jeff, would you like to address us that point?
Yes, very much so. The last point that Terry made about making sure that the bulk of the money for payment for ecosystem services gets to the farmer. It is a real challenge because anytime you bring in an entity to provide a service, that entity takes away some of the funding that might go to the farmer. Even if that entity is providing a bona fide, cost-effective service, the more people involved, the less money stays on the farm. So we're very sensitive to creating programs that make it as easy as possible for farmers to participate with tools and protocols that don't require a lot of outside expertise, so that the bulk of the payments do go to the farmer. It helps to improve the viability of the farm.
Thanks, Jeffrey. And Lori, Representative Lori Osher from Maine has a question in the chat. And Lori, do you want to just come on with your video and ask your question?
Sure. I'm interested in how we incentivize doing these ecosystem services. So the title of this included the word payments. And as I mentioned yesterday, I had a bill in the Maine legislature that passed, and the bill was a resolve to create a working group to discuss how we would incentivize carbon storage. So how would the state decide what should be paid for, and how would the state go about delivering those incentives? So that's a very big question. I know from my work years and years ago with the Soil Conservation Service as a mapper before it became the Natural Resources Conservation Service, that the Farm Bill included and still does incentivizing not farming wetlands. And so the federal government for a long time has figured out that there are ecosystem services that we want to make sure people do so much or manage for that we pay them, or provide a way in which it's a economic incentive. But how we would do this in any of our states is still not clear. And we're about to embark on having a discussion, and we're trying to figure out who the people who should be at the table. And one of the things I've thought about is large land managers are usually, in any business, the bigger your business, the more the chance you have someone who can help figure out how to capitalize on some new policy. But I'd like to see people who are managing small plots of land, like people in urban areas that are taking lots and turning them into agriculture and community farms and gardens. They're also doing the ecosystem service of storing carbon in soils, perhaps. How would we also make sure that at that very fine scale, incentives can get to those people? And before I finish, I'll just respond to Jeffrey's comment that you want to make sure that the money's going to the farm. I see, as a former college educator, and also as a former consultant and land management consultant and technocrat, is that all of these programs also provide jobs to the people who are providing the services, whether it's measuring soil carbon or filing papers to evaluate, to show that the work has been completed, that those are all jobs in rural areas, and that helps build our rural economies. So it's not just the farmers or the foresters, but also all of the different jobs that are created by this.
Thank you so much for that last point. You've said so many things, it's hard to respond to all of your points, but I would say in terms of building out a program, it has to be based on local conditions, the nature of your agriculture, the challenges and opportunities those producers are facing, the nature of your markets. That's what goes into building a locally well-tuned program. And after meeting Carolyn from Vermont, I did a little bit of research on the Vermont Payment for Ecosystem Services work group, and I think that's a wonderful model. So you might find some good perspectives there. You make a very powerful point about the various service providers, and maybe this is a bit off topic, what I'm going to say, but it builds on what you said and goes beyond. With all the discussion we hear these days about unemployment and automation and how many jobs are being lost, there is tremendous opportunity for a whole host of professions, as you noted, in the restoration and protection of ecosystem services and enhancing farming operations that provide a wide range of societal benefits. And I don't mean to say that we should make sure that there's no need for those service providers, because obviously there is a need, but the funding sources have to be sufficient so that the farmers are not taken advantage of and everybody else goes away with a bag of money. So we just have to get a balance there. But I am a big fan of building out this restorative economy. Paul Hawken, many years ago, talked about the tremendous potential of building a restorative economy in this country. And I think we started to make progress. But what you've alluded to is a tremendous economic development, environmental restoration opportunity for our states and nation.
Thank you, Jeffrey. I'm going to go back to a remark that Mark Pacheco made in the chat, and he said the models are promising, but we at the legislative level need to vote on policy. We need the correct policy. And I would just, I'll just add a little bit here because no one else's hand is up, that in Vermont, we're a little bit ahead in terms of the forest carbon. There's a pilot project that is up in northern Vermont known as the Burnt Mountain Project, and they've inventoried and they found that they could not be part of the compliance market, but they could be part of the voluntary market. There's also a project here right in my very own town. I'm looking out at thousands of acres of woodland myself right now. And the Glebe Mountain Project is something that they've worked on. They did a presentation for us. We went on hike up into the forest and watch somebody who's doing the inventory. And I guess my point here is that inventorying the forest is incredibly time consuming and complicated. And this is what's necessary to be able to have credits bought from, or, to be part of the carbon market. And I think that we're not quite as advanced in Vermont with the agricultural aspect of it, but I think it's promising, and I think it's just probably a matter of time that we will advance. And with the good work of Jeff and Cynthia and others, I think that there's a possible answer here. So I'm noticing that we have about 4 minutes left. I'm wondering if there's one additional question that you have for our panelists today. I'm looking for hands or a chat.
If not, Carolyn, I have a couple of New York-centric comments to make.
All right, go for it, Jeff.
I have a final thought as well.
Okay, great. Why don't you guys take it
Can I
and
just
wrap it
interject
up?
for a second?
Oh, go ahead.
Representative Osher has her hand up. I just wanted to give her a chance to get her question in before.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see it.
Oh, thanks. I just, it's great that Vermont has a payment for ecosystem services working group. So, and what does that group come up with on how there would be payments? What are the payments ideas?
So if you want me to, I got a report from Ryan Patch, who is the head of this, and I could read through it fairly quickly. I will tell you that they're still working on metrics and establishing a range of acceptable PES payment rates, estimates of cost to farmers per unit of soil health, an estimate of the total value to society of soil health in Vermont agriculture. So they haven't really gotten to that point yet, but they're doing some really fabulous work, and you can stay tuned, and we'll keep you. I'm going to be, I'm sort of in my summer head, which is shearing sheep and trying to figure out how to make my garden grow in all this water. But I'm happy to sort of report back to you as things progress with that working group. And Ryan Patch is the guy who's the mover and shaker there. He works for the Agency of Agriculture.
Thank you.
All righty. All right. Why don't we turn to Jeff and Cynthia for wrap-up comments?
Yeah, very quickly, my colleague Ken Jaffe urged that we make the point that New York State has a zero emission goal built into our Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. And that's very important. And I want to turn back to Representative Barrett's comment. I apologize. I was using the Hudson Carbon project as a shorthand for the very innovative initiative that you move forward in the state legislature to advance carbon farming. So absolutely, when we develop our local project, we are going to be drawing on the lessons learned from your project.
Fantastic. Cynthia, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, my final comment is, first of all, thanks so much for all of the great questions and discussion. That helps us do the research and the science to provide the evidence base that we've been talking about in terms of, so that you all have the ground-based measurements with the remote sensing, with the modeling that then leads to baselines and actual credible projections of what the practices in terms of carbon sequestration will do. Then with those, then the rates and the values for those, the links to the carbon markets can actually be done. So just want to say we look forward to providing research and science that contributes to the truly viable and successful programs for the ecosystem services. So thanks so much.
Well, we want to thank you both, Cynthia and Jeff, for your time today. We really appreciated these the presentations. I want to thank again Rona and the entire CSG staff for helping us put this together. And with that, I think we will sign off. So thank you.